Next Sunday is the regularly scheduled singing under the pavilion, weather permitting. Last year it was too hot a few months in a row and we didn't sing outside, but hopefully it'll be pleasant and with breathable air. It's kind of hard to sing when you can't breathe. So hopefully the purity of the weather, air, and the temperature will cooperate. Tonight we are going to meditate on Psalms 86, as you can see on the screen. You will notice in your Bibles the superscription says that it was written by David. There is nothing in the chapter itself that gives us any indication of what period of time during David's life that he wrote the psalm. But it is a prayer of David, and we can see that he's dealing with some challenge, some weakness in his life, and he's feeling some danger from men, and he especially feels dependent on God. And I don't know but what there are times when you and I have occasions where we feel especially dependent on God. There's nobody else that can provide the support and encouragement that God can provide. Verse 11, when we get to it, is the center of the psalm. Teach me your way, O Lord, so that I can walk in your truth. As we read down through these 17 verses, as Christians, we will see some ideas to pray when we feel like life is unstable. We talked this morning about how God is stable, God is faithful, and we are not that way. And there are times when our souls feel divided. So let's walk in the prayerful footsteps of David as we look through this psalm. Verses 1 through 7. God hears the cry of the humble. Incline your ear, O Lord, and answer me, for I am afflicted and needy. Preserve my soul, for I am a godly man. O you, my God, save your servant who trusts in you. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for to you I cry all day long. Make glad the soul of your servant, for to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. For you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive and abundant in loving kindness to all who call upon you. Give ear, O Lord, to my prayer and give heed to the voice of my supplications. In the day of my trouble I shall call upon you, for you will answer me. So we stop right there for just a moment and we point out a few things here. I pointed out this morning that our service to God does not begin with self-confidence. It begins with God confidence. Here in David's prayer, we see that the prayer begins with dependence on God. Dependence on God. If we don't depend on God when life is good, we're not going to have a relationship with God to depend on Him when life gets hard. That's why we need to walk with God all the time, to keep that relationship with God strong so that when life does get hard, we know we've got Him to depend on. And we're not panicking when we go to Him because we know He's there. Notice how David emphasizes God's attentiveness. I've got underlined in my Bible verse 1 where he says, incline your ear, answer me. Verse 2, preserve my soul, save your servant. Verse 3, be gracious. Verse 4, make glad my soul. In verse 5, he talks about God's nature, God's character. We talked about that this morning in our sermon. God is good. God is ready to forgive. God abounds in loving kindness. Notice that he says God is ready to forgive. How many times have I talked to Christians who feel like they can't do something because of their past? And God says, I'm ready to forgive. I am ready to forgive. It's a part of His nature. Back to the dependence on God in verse 6, give ear to my prayer. Give heed to the voice of my supplications. And again in verse 7, he says that God answers him. So David depends on God, and David feels that God is attentive to him and to his needs. And certainly we can find encouragement in that, because once God came to earth in the person of Jesus, Jesus clearly shows that he is interested in every person, especially his children. And when our strength is gone, when we feel depleted emotionally and spiritually, that's when God's strength is most visible, especially when we have our relationship with God that we need. A person who is full, in particular of themselves, don't have any room for God's grace. And they can't respond to God's grace because they don't feel like they need it. You know, when you have a presidential candidate who says, I don't need forgiveness because I haven't ever done anything that needs forgiven, you can't receive God's grace when you have that mentality. But when you empty yourself of yourself, then you've got room to receive God's grace, God's power, God's blessings. And in fact, when you are full of God's blessings, then you have to give to others to be a blessing to other people's lives. And I think we see that in David. The history of humanity actually shows that people who live a life of prayer and worshiping God, which is a part of that spiritual mindset, are able to go through crises in life with a lot more hope and resilience and spiritual stability, because you know that God is always there. That doesn't necessarily make it easy, but you know God is there. And they handle it better than those who don't have a relationship with God to base their lives on. Hardship often drives people into deeper dependency on God. But even that is better if we already have a relationship with God before the crisis hits. And David certainly did. David was that kind of man. And so David shows us here his dependence on God. We see in this next paragraph, verses 8 through 10, that David directs worship to God. God is the only one who deserves worship. So God has helped David in verses 1 through 7, and so David's response to God is what? Worship him. He's already mentioned trusting God in verse 2, lifting up his soul to God in verse 4, and of course he's talking about prayer through the whole verse, a whole paragraph. So now he comes to worshiping God. Verse 8, there is no one like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. All nations whom you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and they shall glorify your name. For you are great and do wondrous deeds. You alone are God. And so David sees all nations, notice, all nations worshiping God. God has always planned to have one church, one kingdom that includes everybody to worship him. And David anticipates that here in this text. There's no one like the God above in verse 8, and there is no God who can do the kinds of things that Jehovah God does. God has no equal in the world. And so all nations come before him and worship him, and they glorify his name. When hands are weak and eyes are dim, the soul still learns to cling to him. The strongest prayer that lips may frame begins with need and ends with name, the name of God. And so David, again, refers to God's nature in verse 10, and he says, God is great and he does wondrous works, wondrous deeds. He alone is God. The idols of the world promise many things, but they cannot deliver. Why? Because they're not real. They're not real gods. In our society, whatever draws our deepest trust, our ultimate trust, is the object of our worship. And so, here's what nations have worshiped down through the years and what our people in our nation worship. That is what they put their ultimate trust in. Power, the ability to control other people through laws, regulations, whatever. Wealth, obviously. If I've got financial success, then everything's good and I don't need God. I don't need the church. I don't need religion. People worship success. As long as I am doing good, I am right with God. As long as everything's going well with me, I am right with God. People worship gods like they did back in Bible times. And control. But none of these can compare to the blessings that come from the real God. The blessings that come through Jesus Christ. A flashlight shows light in a small area. You compare the light from a flashlight to the light of the sun. So is there some hope? Is there some encouragement? Is there some stability in financial success? Yes. Is there some stability in success? Yes. But it's only temporary. It doesn't provide success into life after death. So there is some good that comes from the things that the world tends to worship, and of course those are blessings from God, but they pale in comparison to what comes from God. And it's like comparing a flashlight with the light from the sun. There's no comparison. In verses 11 through 13, David talks about the undivided heart. And again, verse 11 is the theological center of the chapter. Let's read the verses. Teach me your way, O Lord. I will walk in your truth. Unite my heart to feel your name. I will give thanks to you, O Lord my God, with all my heart and will glorify your name forever. For your loving kindness toward me is great, and you have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol. Teach me your way so I can walk in your truth. Unite my heart. Do you have a divided heart? Or a heart that's united with Christ? You know, I think all of us are familiar with Romans chapter 6, where Paul talks about the fact that when we're baptized into Christ, we are baptized into his death, and we become united together with Christ. The old King James Version says planted together in his likeness. The idea is union. So when we're baptized into Christ, we are united together with Christ. Really, we shouldn't have any more divided loyalties at that point. Our divided loyalties, the competing desires that we have in our heart, they really should stop when we're baptized. They don't, because that's human nature, but they should. At that moment, when Christ was baptized, he lived the rest of his life in complete devotion to the Father. His Bible study was exactly what it should be. His prayer life was exactly what it should be. The times when he goes to worship, either publicly or on his own, was exactly what it should be, right? Because he's God in the flesh. And that's the standard. That's the goal to meet. A consistent devotion to God. So back to Psalms 86, notice in verse 12, David says, I will give thanks to you. So I learn your ways, I walk in your truth, and I respond by giving thanks. Gratitude. Gratitude helps us get through the hard times in life. and glorify your name, verse 12. And he mentions God's loving kindness again in verse 13. He mentions it back in verse 5. Chesed is the Hebrew word for loving kindness. Your translation might say steadfast love, something along those lines. It includes love and includes kindness. And there's another idea that's also included. It's the idea of loyalty. Loyalty, kindness, and love. God is loyal to His people. God is loyal to His children. That's why God will never turn His back on us. That's why Jesus is able to say, I will be with you until the end of the age. Because of God's steadfast love, loving kindness, His loyalty. And David mentions in verse 13 that God has delivered his soul from the depths of Sheol. Could you imagine having a compass that had two needles on it that pointed in different directions? Or a compass that had two norths on it? You wouldn't know which way to go. Which one is the real needle? And people who try to live in a way that pleases the world and try to live in a way that pleases God are trying to follow a compass with two needles. And of course, that's not the way Jesus lived. God teaches us through His Word what He expects out of us, and when we learn the truth, we are obligated to obey the truth, to live it in our lives as best we can. But if we try to keep one foot in the world or one foot in the cares of the world and the other foot in Christ, that creates a divided heart, and that generates its own stress. So God calls on us from beginning to end, give our lives totally to Him. Follow God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Let's look at the last paragraph. Beginning in verse 14, David says that God delivers His servants, he says, with compassion. Verse 14. O God, arrogant men have risen up against me, and a band of violent men have sought my life. Now, these arrogant men he's talking about, who are they in David's life? If we try to put this psalm in a historical context, who are the arrogant men that tried to take David's life? Lots of options. It could be his own son, Absalom. It could be his counselor, Ahithophel. It could be a number of foreign nations that he winds up fighting with. The Syrians, the Edomites, on and on and on. Philistines. And that's why we don't know the context. But the point is, David did not live an easy life. If we look at all that David wrote and we think, oh, David lived in a rose garden, you don't know much about the life of David. He did not live an easy life. But he found confidence in God. So let's go on. Verse 15. Verse 14 at the end, they have not set you before them. So these arrogant men that David is concerned about, they don't care about God. Verse 15, but you, O Lord, are a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness and truth. Turn to me and be gracious to me. O grant your strength to your servant and save the son of your handmaid. Show me a sign for good, that those who hate me may see it and be ashamed, because you, O Lord, have helped me and comforted me. God delivers with compassion. We cannot forget the nature of God. This is now the third time in this psalm that David has mentioned the loving kindness of God. This description of God from verse 15 comes originally from Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7, right after Israel makes the golden calf. And God is so mad at Israel, God tells Moses, I want to just destroy the whole nation and start over with you. In that discussion, God describes Himself in these terms. God is merciful. God is gracious. God is slow to anger. God abounds in loyalty and in faithfulness. That's the God David served. That's the God you and I serve. So when we go through hard times in life, that's the God we need to remind ourselves is up there. This God who delivers with compassion. So we anchor ourselves to God's character. We anchor ourselves to God's truth. And it provides stability. An anchor doesn't calm the storms, does it? It just keeps the ship safe. So I've already alluded to thinking about Jesus in terms of this psalm. Jesus set the standard. Jesus did not live an easy life either. Jesus had the Pharisees who started wanting to kill him very early in his ministry, who tried to talk other people into not following Jesus. But that didn't get Jesus distracted. He always walked consistent with the Father's truth. He lived with a perfect fear and honor for the Father in heaven. And that's part of the reason why he prayed so much, because he depended on the Father that much. And when he suffered, he trusted God. So Jesus provides the example for us. And Jesus says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to live a wholehearted devotion to the Father. Even though Jesus lived in Palestine in AD 30, Jesus had in mind his followers in Swartz Creek, Michigan in AD 2026. Love God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, and with all of your mind. Jesus had us in mind when he leads Paul in Colossians 3 and verse 15 to write, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. You remember what verse 16 says, right? Colossians 3 and verse 16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and encouraging one another in what? Psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. Verse 15, he says, let peace rule. What is one thing you can do to let peace rule? Sing praises to God. Isn't that what Psalms 87, 86 is? Prayer, song. It might start it as a prayer, but you add some qualities to it and you turn it into a song. If you don't have religious songs that you can listen to, let me know and I can make some suggestions. Rachel and I have CDs by the Richland Hills Church of Christ singers. I don't know what they call themselves. It's a cappella. Very encouraging. Stick in the CD player in the car. Play it at home. Very encouraging. Colossians 3 verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Jesus also tells us to depend on him in prayer. He has Peter write, cast all your anxiety upon him because he cares for you. Peter is just summarizing what David has already said here in Psalms 86. Walk in dependence on God. God can not only change our circumstances, but he can unite our hearts together with him. When times are going well and when times are challenging, God is there to listen to our prayers and to do for us what he knows is best. So I extend his invitation to you tonight. If you need encouragement, if you need prayers, if you need strength, let us know. Let's stand and sing.